Good evening, everyone.
This is what we're going to say.
Hello.
Exactly, but I'm just saying, right?
Hello. Good evening. Afternoon. My name is Joyce Smith. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm going to be your moderator for our session on growing healthy food for your family and community. How much regulation does it take to be a good neighbor? I'm going to introduce the panel, the presenters that are with us, and then we're going to move right in because our time, I appreciate everybody taking the time to come. We have Elsa Lankford. We have Meg. Oh, no. Meg. Okay. We have Alan, have May Johnson, and
Naima.
And we're going to start in that order, so without any further ado, I'm going to allow Elsa's going to come up and do her presentation. I'm going to have the presenters do their presentation, and then we take questions at the end for the sake of time.
Okay, so I'm a sound person, so I had to incorporate sound in some way, and it's just in the title in this. I called this buzzing, clucking, and bleating. I had to be so careful with the pronunciation of that, bleating, in the city. The interesting intersection of regulations, neighbors, and backyard urban farmers. My name is Elsa Lankford. I'm an associate professor at Towson University. I work with sound. I also work with bees and veggies in my backyard and front yard garden in Baltimore City. I wanted to do a little kind of a showing what, how cities have worked with urban agriculture. This is Jewett Hill Park with a full-time shepherd on the payroll for over 50 years, with the sheep, very quietly mowing the lawn there. And then, what's amazing is how urban agriculture has kind of had its ups and downs, and cities been strongly encouraged, and is being strongly encouraged again. So these are some vintage posters about how important it is that everybody has to have at least 2 hens so that they can have eggs for the entire family. If we kind of put that against the USDA study in 2012, and basically what they did was they asked residents in Denver, LA, Miami, and New York what they thought about farming, doing urban farming with chickens. Here before we had the government asking everybody to have chickens, and in this survey, less than 1% of the households had chickens, but people with bigger properties were much more likely, obviously, to have chickens. But in terms of the number of households that wanted to get chickens in the next 5 years, and this was in 2012, so it's probably this number will be even increased even more now. That's a pretty substantial growth to go from 0.8% to 4% that are wanting it. 40% in favor of wanting chickens in their communities or to have their neighbors be allowed to have chickens. This is where it gets to be a little interesting, that more than half of the people surveyed thought that chickens in cities would lead to more human illness, yet 2/3 thought that these same chickens that could lead to human illness would have more, eggs that are healthier than store-bought. So it's interesting how Meg and I were talking that maybe it's, the eggs are fine, just keep the chickens away. So it's just kind of interesting to see. So what I basically did was I went through some of the different regulations for backyard urban livestock. Ones that had some interesting aspects to them, whether they were completely open or whether they were very restrictive. So Portland, for instance, allows you to do some urban livestock without any permits. So you can have 3 total hens, ducks, doves, pigeons, rabbits, or small goats without a permit. All of the regulations, most of the regulations, I should say, have some specifics about, housing, about where the animal housing is going to be. So in this case, 15 feet from buildings, 50 feet from foods being sold, prepared, or kept. If it's a louder animal, so the goats, for instance, which are not known for necessarily being quiet, then they need to be kept a little bit further away. So what I looked into was kind of hens, bees, and goats. Those are things that are allowed in Baltimore City as well. I wanted to kind of compare and contrast. So bees allow you to, in Portland, you can have 4 or less hives, as long as you tell everybody within 150 feet and have them sign a petition, which I found very interesting because 150 feet that's a pretty far distance, and the fact that they have to sign something is, I just find that very interesting, and not sure if I agree with it. But bees have to be kept a certain distance away from public spaces, and again, this 150 feet rule where you have to have a certain 6-foot fence or hedge to basically protect the people from the bees as they're going into the hive. San Francisco, I basically went from west over to east. So San Francisco also, Western U.S. regulations. You can have 2 goats or beehives without a permit at all. If you're going to have, the goats graze, like your lawn or a bunch of brush, then that's fine. You don't have to get a permit for that. You can have a company come in or an organization come in with more goats without needing special permission. You can have at least 4 hens. So it was interesting just to kind of, again, compare and contrast what was happening with these different regulations and how the cities are putting, more or less regulations on urban farmers, backyard farmers. So in Cleveland, which had very restrictive rules, it was, to me, I think would be very confusing to raise urban livestock there because it's different regulations based on whether you live or work, farm in a residential or non-residential area. Can't have things in the front yard. I know we're going to be talking a little bit about what can be done in front yards. No roosters, geese, or turkeys. Roosters are something that, everybody, when we talk about having chickens in the yard, roosters are almost always not allowed. But in this case, in Cleveland, if you have at least an acre of ground and some other restrictions, then you can actually have roosters. And then having, a lot of times you're going to see about certain space for the coops. So in this case, coop must be less than 32 square feet, less than 15 feet high. That's an incredible size coop. When I saw that, I was trying to imagine what that must be like to have how they came up with that number.
For turkeys.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, turkeys need care.
Okay, because a 15-foot chicken coop is a little excessive. And then an outdoor enclosure. And what I did find also very interesting in this is how each city has different space regulations. Some are as small as say 2 square feet, and in this case, it's at least for outside, it's 10 square feet. You needed 2. Got 2 left. Ooh, okay. You need a 2-year license from the Department of Public Health. So I'll just kind of go through these a little bit. I really want to get to Baltimore's. Okay. When I practice this, I must have talked a lot faster. So again, Cleveland has very, it's you have to kind of go through like a checklist to be able to do urban livestock farming. Memphis, what I thought was interesting there is they allow apiaries in terms of bees. As long as you have a yard that's at least 10,000 square feet, you're allowed to have apiaries. It doesn't say what apiaries mean. It doesn't give you any restrictions on number of hives or anything like that. That's really all that they said. New York, New York has the most open regulations in terms of anybody can have bees as long as you say where they are. You can have as many bees as you want. They just can't be a nuisance, and they have to have water. You can have any number of chickens. You don't need a permit for that. You don't even need to say where they are. So here in New York is the biggest city in the U.S., and they have like very little regulations for animals, and yet so many others have very restrictive. So I think what I'm going to do. What's that?
I said, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just kind of. It did come up today at one of the bus tour. We do allow goats in Baltimore. You can have 2 goats, or actually up to 6 goats. And what I'll do is I'll kind of and bees. Yay. I will. Let's see. I'll just kind of go to the end. So to think about, how do we encourage grassroots sustainability movements while still balancing property rights? Can they be too restrictive? I mean, if you are too restrictive with regulations, then people are just going to go underground, and you're not going to know who they are, and that means that the conditions for these animals could be worse off. And could there be a day when everybody has the same regulations, and anybody can be able to not have to basically go through all of these hoops to be able to have bees, chickens, and goats? So, thank you.
We have 5 presenters, and I'm of the essence. So I hate to seem like I'm rushing them along.
That was good.
Next, we have Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg Algren. I also am at Towson University, and Elsa and I last spring semester taught a class in food justice and really kind of got interested in urban farming. I live out in a rural area. I'm a master gardener, and everybody around us has chickens, goats, horses, cows, and pigs. So it works fine with us, but then we're talking 100-acre lots. So I'm going to be talking about lawns. And I'm going to start off with this video.
Over 80% of the state of California is in a drought labeled as extreme by the U.S. Drought Monitor map. Residents have been asked to cut back on their water usage, but as Danielle Nottingham reports, not everyone is getting the message.
In the midst of California's unprecedented drought,
it's getting worse and worse, and I think everybody should be doing something about it.
Michael and Laura Cordy felt they were answering Governor Jerry Brown's urgent call to turn off the tap.
Everyone should try to do at least 20% conservation of their water use. This takes a coming together of all the people of California.
So now, the grounds outside the state capitol building are turning brown, and so is the Cordy's lawn. On Tuesday, the same day, California officials authorized fines of up to $500 for overwatering, the Cordys got this letter from the city of Glendora.
You have 60 days to get your lawn looking like this, or else.
And the penalty was fined $100 to $500 or criminal prosecution, whatever that means.
Yes, a $500 fine for underwatering.
It's kind of crazy considering the state of the state.
Yeah, it goes against common sense.
That's the dilemma facing Californians. Water so readily available, and yet so scarce. Danielle Nottingham, CBS News, Los Angeles.
All right. I am not, Elsa's really good with this tech stuff, yeah, no, thank you. And then I'm doing this. Wait.
Don't go again.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at what the lawn situation is in the United States. And while we look at urban agriculture as opportunities for locavores and to improve the quality of food that many people can get hold of, with lawns we're looking at something maybe a little bit different. There is no doubt that the U.S. is going through, major parts of the U.S. are going through water problems. Right now there are 40 million acres in lawn, 3 times the amount of corn that there is in corn cultivation and twice as much as in cotton cultivation. More than $30 billion a year is spent on lawn upkeep. It is the largest irrigated crop in the U.S. with more than 7 billion gallons used annually, which is 60% of the potable water in the western United States and up to 30% of potable water. By potable water, we're talking city drinkable water in the eastern United States. More than 40 million tons of fertilizer are used, 35 million tons of synthetic pesticides. The rate of pesticide use of home to farm is 10-1. So yes, farms use pesticides, but at a much, much lower rate. Farms use fertilizer, but at a much, much lower rate. The average large lawn service uses 32 pesticides annually, with 41 of them banned or restricted in other countries, 53 classified as possible carcinogenic, and 100% labeled as risk to the environment, and that includes plants, animals, and the water supply. 100 million gallons of gasoline are burned annually on lawn care. 10.8 million gallons was what was spilled with the Exxon Valdez. 17 million gallons are spilled annually from the refilling of lawn equipment. So we're looking at some crazy stuff going on, not only as far as water use is concerned, which is kind of what brought all this to a head, but also as far as fuel and dangers to the environment. So what are the alternatives? Stones. You live out west, you know, stones, natural gardens, lots of sand, native plant landscaping, vegetables, dormant lawns, concrete, which is probably lower on the list than, or artificial turf. What would happen if we look at alternatives to lawns are less water, less fertilizer, less pesticides, and motorized equipment with a garden in the front yard. With a garden in the front yard. Gardens generally take about half as much water as a lawn, and it's much more efficient because on a plot the size of a front lawn, you can take a hose and water it plant by plant by plant, instead of having a sprinkler, a widespread sprinkler that loses a lot of the water. But, so why do we want these lawns or these gardens in the front yard to start with? One, when we look at water use, it makes some sense. But two, sometimes the backyard isn't really workable. The exposure is wrong, the soil conditions are bad, or the backyard space and usage. You know, you might have a garage or a deck fenced in and the pets run around, and that's the bad kind of fertilizer for your garden. Or the kids, you know, you fence off the backyard and let the kids run around. They're little with swings. They're not garden compatible. Question is, can lawns legally be regulated or banned in the U.S.? Well, we do not have a long-term history with lawns. It was the mid-19th century when front lawns were vegetable gardens or native vegetation, and you just kept it mode. Frederick Law Olmsted and Central Park introduced vast manicured green spaces showing that if you had enough money, you too could control nature. So what's the case for, that was, and that's when it started, guys. I mean, everybody wanted to have a lawn that looked like Central Park. Case for productive landscapes. They're not always called front yard gardens, productive landscapes. Suburban lawns provide status. They have allowed non-native turf grasses that don't support native birds or pollinators or beneficial insects or native species in any way. There is no return to the environment except they do provide transpiration. All plants do. So at least it's not concrete, and water can get into the lawn. It's not covered over with hard surface. But that's about it. So why do we have this thing with these lawns and danger of gardens when we're looking at bad watering problems and all kinds of conditions that speak to a change of attitude? People are afraid of property devaluation. They're afraid if somebody puts a lawn in, God knows what the next door neighbors or a potential buyer will think. And then there are a lot of people that just don't like the way gardens look. There are a number of bodies that can do restrictions, local zoning codes. Some specify what plants, shrubs, turf, annuals, or even what species can be planted. And I think it's really funny. Many of the local zoning codes that say you can only plant annuals do not recognize vegetables as an annual. But, tomatoes die every year, guys. Then there are the deed and lease and condominium documents, homeowners associations, which can be really bummy. And then there are also state restrictions. There are regulations in place that already monitor or control lawns, setbacks, front yard garden bans, weed nuisance ordinance. If you don't cut your grass, we're coming out, cutting the grass and charge you $100 for doing it, says the city. But there are also regulations in place that can help ban or regulate lawns. And that can be based on air, water quality, noise, public good, and watering bans. With more than 50% of the U.S. in drought conditions this past year, we really need to take a look at the pros and cons. 2 minutes? 2 minutes. All right, we're getting there. There have been issues brought up in every state of the United States concerning gardens except Alaska, and maybe they don't have gardens in Alaska, I don't know. One of the biggest landmark cases was what's known as the Orlando Compromise, and it was over a woman who wanted to do a garden in the front yard, and it just causes tremendous dichotomy of sides to get formed. Yes, no, and what the city finally compromised on was 60% limit on garden space in the front yard, a 3-foot setback, and no height limit, but the garden has to be well maintained. I mean, that sounds reasonable. With the climate conditions being as they are, maybe we need to look at incentives to change or to conserve. Change from lawns to gardens. Lawn tax, water rates, water limits, tear-up rewards. If you tear up the lawn, you get some sort of tax break. Extension office assistance, seminars. Municipal buildings and monuments can start by taking a look at the lawns that they maintain at taxpayers' money and see if it doesn't make sense to have a community garden instead. We need to change the norm of what a garden, what the front yard should look like. If it doesn't work, we also need to remember that people aren't always the best gardeners. There's always got to be a plan B. But dangerous waters ahead, dangerous waters ahead. The lawn service industry is a $38 billion annual industry. And you add another 40 billion annually if you include landscapers, which also do lawn maintenance. Profit margins range from 14 to 26%, a lot of money in lawn maintenance. Almost 1 million people are employed, and 60% of all landscape businesses are residential. So what to do? Grassroots activism? Passive resistance. Plant edibles that no one notices. Basil, corn, potatoes, spinach, Swiss chard, all kinds of herbs, but stay away from vegetables that look like vegetables. Tomatoes, peas, beans, or other large-sized plants. Corn, it's enough. No corn. No corn. But we're going to have to figure this out. I just read an article that says that it looks like this drought in California could be around for the next 15 to 20 years, and it's part of a cyclical cycle. So we got to figure something out.
Thank you. Now, folks, it's 5:05, and I have 3 more presenters. If we do the math, we're going to be a little bit over. And if you want to ask questions, I'll open it up for anyone to stay late. That may mean speak for your next event. But I'm going to give all my presenters equal time.
I should be able to do it on time. I'm Alan Nemeth. I teach animal law at University of Baltimore School of Law and the American University Washington College of Law in D.C. I was asked to speak about the animal cruelty statutes today. So what I'm going to do is just, since there's not a lot of time, I'm just going to focus on the Maryland statutes. There may be some tweaks, a county or a city may have a couple of little riffs on the state law, but state law will give you a good overview of what is considered cruelty in the state. So the first thing you have to know is, what is an animal? Seems like a common sense question, but state by state, even sometimes law by law, an animal is defined differently. For Maryland, an animal is any living creature that's not a human being. So that's very broad, right? That includes insects and fish and reptiles. So that's any living creature except a human being. So keep that in mind. So when Maryland, when the legislature passed the statute, what was their intent? What did they want to protect? They wanted to protect all animals from intentional cruelty. And that includes privately owned animals, strays, domesticated animals, feral animals, farm animals, animals owned by corporations or institutions, and animals used in medical research. So those are all, the intent was to cover all of those animals. There are some exemptions to the statute. The one that's applicable to this group is customary and normal veterinary and agricultural husbandry practices, including dehorning, castration, tail docking, and limit feeding. Those would be exempt if they are customary or normal agricultural husbandry practices. Doesn't mean you should do it, but you wouldn't get in trouble for it. Okay, so what is under the cruelty statute? There's a misdemeanor and a felony. Every state now has felony statutes. So, by the way, if anyone wants to look it up, the statute it's in the Maryland Criminal Code, section 10-601. I would write it on the board. That's so 10-601 and forward. So abuse or neglect of an animal is 10-604. So what is prohibited? A person may not overdrive or overload an animal, deprive an animal of necessary sustenance, and that would apply to this, to anyone interested in urban agriculture. So you got to feed and water the animals appropriately. Infliction of unnecessary suffering or pain on an animal is also prohibited. So what is unnecessary? You don't know. It's a case-by-case basis, and that would be in your trial when you go to court. You'd have to prove it was necessary pain. So one of the problems in law, a lot of things are not defined. So it's a matter of interpretation. Or you cannot cause, procure, or authorize any of those things. So even if you don't do it yourself, if you cause it to happen, or let someone do that, you would still be liable for it. And if the person has charge or custody of an animal as an owner or otherwise, you don't even have to be the owner. if you're babysitting for someone's chickens and you let something happen, you could be liable. And you unnecessarily fail to provide the animal with nutritious food in sufficient quantity, necessary vet care, proper drink, air, space, shelter, or protection from the weather, that would be fall under this misdemeanor. And the penalty is 90 days in prison or $1,000 or both, up to, or both. The court could also require that you get psychological counseling. And they could prevent you from owning or possessing animals in the future, or for some time. So that's the misdemeanor. Felony is 10-606. This is aggravated cruelty, and this is it's worse cruelty. A person may not intentionally mutilate, torture, cruelly beat, or cruelly kill an animal, which lets you wonder, well, what is cruelly beating and what is just regular beating? That's not in the statute, but that's what the statute says. Or to cause or procure or authorize any of those things. Except, here's an exception, in the case of self-defense, if a goat's coming after you, you feel frightened by the goat. So the penalty for the felony is up to 3 years, or $5,000, or both, which is not that harsh of a penalty when you guys have heard some of the really bad cruelty going on, particularly in Baltimore. So 3 years is not a lot, but that's what the penalty is. So those are the main cruelty statutes. A couple other ones you may want to keep in mind that you may not have thought of. You can't give away animals as a prize. So if you have a farm, or if you have a little plot of land and you have extra chickens, or they lay eggs and they happen to hatch and you have chicks, and you have a local church function, you can't give them away as a prize. That's section 10-610. So it's prohibited without the approval of the Secretary of Agriculture for a person to give away a live animal as a prize for or an inducement to enter a contest, game, or other competition. So in Maryland, even those competitions where you throw the ping pong ball into a goldfish bowl, that's illegal. Because remember, animal includes any live creature that's not a human. An inducement, so you can't give away an animal as a prize, etc., as an inducement to enter a place of amusement, or as an incentive to make a business agreement if the offer is to attract the trade. Now, it's a misdemeanor, and that's only subject to a fine. You won't go to prison for that, but it's $500, up to $500. Another one you may not have known of, again, it's not common, but you can't color a chick. And this has been popular in certain jurisdictions, like around Easter time. Chicks hatch, and you paint them pink or light blue or green or something. Any chick that's under 3 weeks of age, you can't do that to. I don't know why there's the 3-week cutoff, but a chick means a chicken, a duckling, or any other fowl under 3 weeks of age. So again, if you want to dress up your chicks, you can't do that. Well, you can dress them up. You just can't dye. You can't dye their hair, their fur, their feathers. Again, it's a misdemeanor, but the fine is only $25. But again, you don't want to do that because chicks don't really like to be pink or blue. And you can't you can't give them away as a pet, toy, premium, or novelty. You can't color, dye, stain, or otherwise change to natural color. And I guess the final two things I'll talk about. When people get tired of their pets, sometimes they just let them go. That's illegal too. So you can't just take your goat or your chicken or whatever to the local woods and say, here, go be free, you're an animal, you can deal with it. That's prohibited under 10-612. A person who owns, possesses, or has custody of a domestic animal may not drop or leave the animal on a road, in a public place, or on private property with the intent to abandon the animal. So that's a misdemeanor, and it's up to a fine of $100. So now you may ask, well, we know what an animal is, but this says domestic animal. What's a domestic animal? And under Maryland law, it's not defined. So and I looked it up again, for this conference, there is no definition of the Maryland law. Now we can look at the Baltimore County statute. They have a definition of what a domestic animal is, and we can, extrapolate that to Maryland. But under Baltimore County's statute, a domestic animal means an animal that is accustomed to living in or about the habitation of humans. And that includes cats, dogs, cows, fowl, ferrets, horses, or swine.
Swine.
That's what it says. A domestic animal does not include a wild animal. So even if you have a wild animal as a pet, like if you have a monkey as a pet, that would not be included as a domestic animal. Because they are not accustomed. Perfect. So anyway, so again, you got to know what you're working with. But it's interesting. Domestic animal. It says it includes, but it doesn't say it excludes other things. So that's I would say that's a partial list. Anyway, so those are some things to keep in mind. So let's treat your animals well.
And everyone, that was Alan, our presenter, Meg, Elsa, now Maggie Johnson is coming up. Will you need him?
I might.
Well, good afternoon, all of you. I know that you have had a great day, and I hope I'll be able to contribute to that day. I am the administrator for the Maryland Agricultural Conflict Resolution Service. It is an organization within the Maryland Department of Agriculture. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. ACRES is what we call our program. It is a USDA certified state mediation program. It's funded by a federal grant with matching funds from the state. In addition to the federal portion of the program, which addresses conflict with USDA or U.S. Department of Agriculture agencies, we also have what is called the Maryland Right to Farm law or statute. I have copies of it for you. So if you would like to pick a copy of that up, you're welcome to it. Because in the state of Maryland, the counties have gone a little bit further than that statute and added some additional restrictions and guidances in that statute. So there are 36 certified U.S. Department of Agricultural states that offer mediation for issues related to USDA programs and activities. So that's something that you want to know because urban agriculture is eligible for some USDA programs. Part 2, the Maryland Right to Farm Conflict Resolution, is what you're interested in terms of the state law. Because that does say that the farmers have a right to farm, and it limits the actions that non-farm neighbors can take against them as long as the farmer is within legal guidelines. It addresses nuisance suits against agricultural operations. And nuisance suits have to do with standard things that farmers do. They make dust, there are odors, there are slow-moving vehicles and so forth in the road. So I encourage you to become a little familiar with that, especially at the state level and at the county level. This is the definition of an agricultural operation. This is in that statute. One of the things that you're going to have to consider is whether the urban area that you're in meets the statute for on-farm production. So some of the things that need to be clarified haven't been clarified with regard to urban. So that's just sort of the way that it is right now. This defines what an agricultural operation means. It is for the processing of agricultural crops, on-farm production, harvesting, or marketing of any agricultural, horticulture, silviculture, aquaculture, or aquaculture product that has been grown, raised, or cultivated by a farmer. So that is the state law, that is the definition for Maryland. Again, you want to look at what your counties say and your other local jurisdictions say with regard to what they consider farming. Under the right to farm, there is protection if you have been in existence for at least a year or more. I don't know how that's being applied to the area of urban yet. It has not been clarified. The presenters from this morning talked about the concept of people coming to the nuisance. With regard to urban, your neighbors are already present, so the farming is coming to them. So there needs to be some work on how to clarify. In any case, the farming activity cannot be engaged in a negligent manner. So you can't cause problems for your neighbors, you can't make anybody sick, and there are county, state, and local laws that give you some guidance on that. And I mentioned the noise, odors, dust, insects from the operation. And this talks about the fact that the law doesn't prohibit the application of federal, state, or local government from enforcing health, environmental zoning, or any other applicable law. So the farmer or the person that's engaging in urban agriculture, they have to be sure that they meet all of the local laws. Okay. With regard to the mediation program that I manage, which is called ACRES, these are definitions of what agricultural disputes are. Now, these are some of the types of conflicts that we have managed. I was asked to talk about a few examples of urban agricultural conflicts. I don't have any. I'm reminded of a time that I had to investigate an organization that said, we never have any complaints. The reason they never had any complaints is because they didn't tell anybody that they could complain. So, I hope that you all do take this brochure, and if you need help in terms of mediating activities or events, then be sure to contact us. These are typical conflicts that occur or have occurred in Maryland. Conflicts can occur around anything. It's not restricted to these. We have engaged in mediating or working toward resolving conflicts having to do with local, county, and state law interpretation, neighbor to neighbor, citizen to government, or government to citizen, implementation of agricultural activity. Sometimes it's not necessarily that the activity is illegal, it's how it's being implemented. Leasing is becoming more and more of an issue because of the types of leases that producers are using that don't give all of the information that they need to have when they can get out of the lease. So we're working on that. Trespassing is an issue, and the standard thing, noise, odors, dust, and insects. Soil management, having to do with nutrient management requirements in the Maryland fertilizer law. If you have $2,500 or more of income, then you have to have what is called a nutrient management plan. If you don't have that plan, you can be fined. Maryland has some very strict guidance on it. You have to take a course, or you have to have someone who has taken a course work up the plan that you follow. The Maryland State Fertilizer Law says that you can only use certain types of fertilizer. So those are laws that you need to be aware of. With regard to U.S. Department of Agriculture programs, when you engage with the federal government, they have requirements that you must live with. They can take action against you. We have also had farmers market issues, market to manager versus the producer. Okay. Now, this was my task for this afternoon to talk about some case discussions. I looked at our cases and I tried to find some that I thought you would benefit from. One of the cases that we mediated happened in a small town in Montgomery County where the whole town wanted to rise up against the farmer. They did not want that farmer farming in their community. The mayor requested mediation, which we provided a facilitated meeting. About 18 citizens showed up. The farmer had been so angry that he was not hearing what the problem was. The problem was that the nutrients that were being brought in to fertilize his land were stinking up the town. The young men who were driving the trucks with the liquid nutrients were not screwing the things on tightly. But in the meantime, the citizens said, we don't want this farmer, we don't want him to come to town. As a result of that meeting, though, they understood from the farmer and his wife that they were willing to work with the town. They were able to correct the situation. And so they worked up a plan. And the town became more supportive of the farmer. Time's up. Okay. All right.
You can wrap it up.
Okay. Well, I have other examples for you. I think that you can kind of look at what the children do, and that was an issue of trespass. And those are things that we talked about today as we visited some of the farms. There was a major issue with the walking path where people want to walk through farmland and so forth, and those things had to be mediated, and all of those that I brought to you were successful mediations because I wanted to leave on a positive note. I do have things for you if you would like. The Maryland state law is here. This is the discussion of the program. And since I'm from the South, I knew I wouldn't get everything said. You have a copy of the PowerPoint. I call slow. Thank you.
Naima. There we go. Think about it. And because we started 10 minutes, we almost on pass. We started 10 minutes late.
Well, I'm going to try to keep it short, sweet, and simple. It's Friday, 5:30 almost, and I think we can. Okay. So good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Naima Jenkins-El, and I work for the University of Maryland Extension, Baltimore City. I am the urban ag educator as well as the master garden coordinator, and there are a lot of things going on in Extension. We are actually celebrating 100 years nationally for the cooperative extension system, and we will have a big celebration next month, and you'll probably be apprised of some of the activities. So, but the topic for today was just to grow and healthy food for your family and community, and how much regulation does it take to be a good neighbor? I really thought that was such an interesting question, because personally I don't think you should have much regulation to be a good neighbor. I'm going to be coming from a proactive approach. What do I do to click this? Okay, got it. So, if you're considering growing food, there's some things you want to think about before you even start. The idea is to really begin to engage the community in your initial plan, because the better you engage them, the more power and partnership that they'll be feeling when you include them in your processes. And as far as it pertains to urban farming, a lot of urban farms are taking places in underserved communities, and they have no idea of the relevance of what you may be bringing to the community. So you as the farmer or the community gardener, your job would be bring an educational component in, because why is it important to have a community garden in an area that doesn't have access to good food? That, you know, if you've been in this cycle and you don't even realize how relevant it is, I don't know why I want a community garden. What's so great about what you bring when I can get a chicken box? So it's about really being proactive. As a gardener or a farmer, you know, when you think of what you're going to grow, you want to be proactive because you know those pests are coming. No matter what you plant, you will have pests. So you can either try to prevent the situation beforehand or possibly deal with a situation that you will have to talk to May about. And that's not what you really want when you're going into a community and trying to have a great impact. So talk to neighbors before you start. Community gardens, it requires the community. One person cannot run a community garden successfully. It's such a major undertaking. Just for resources, you can contact the local extension offices, regulatory agencies, and grading agencies to explore resources to help get your garden started. Now for urban farms, there are so many different types of urban farms and the focuses. I would definitely recommend having a clear, concise vision of what it is that you're trying to bring into the community. What would benefit, what opportunities are you going to provide? Because I found that, you know, people will walk by and, okay, what's that? It's just a farm. You're more likely to have instances of vandalism, theft, and destruction when you don't include the community. And it's not an easy process in urban areas because, like I said, a lot of folks do not have an idea of why you're even doing what you're doing besides the passion and love like that I have for it. But it's very important to the future, because I found that a lot of it, when we go talk to children, a lot of young people have no idea of possible career choices in this. So you could really be impacting someone's life, exposing them to horticulture as well as agriculture. I'm a flower lover. Food is a necessity, but I love flowers. So flowers is kind of what kind of got me started on this path. It's important to spend time building the relationships. You want the community to be able to trust you, and when you're not there, those community members will be watching over your property. It'll be that little old lady that'll be looking out the window watching somebody tear up the hoop house and they'll call the police to, you know, so it'll help eliminate possible situations. Community associations, schools, faith-based groups, and local businesses. I always encourage folks when they come to my office or call for support, I say, have you done any community development? Because people don't realize if you go into the heart of the hood, as I say, what you're doing is not relevant to me in my world. So you have to find a way to kind of cross the lines and really share the relevance of it is of what you're doing. Recruiting community members as volunteers and interested learning to grow is another, I think, key component. I've done a lot of volunteering myself. I actually wouldn't be here without the Master Gardener program. It's a volunteer program. When I got started, I was just like, wow, all of this is going on in Baltimore City. I've been a resident for most of my life and didn't have a clue of places of silver, you know, and it's such a beautiful place. So it's important to really educate folks on opportunities because it's so many things that people could be doing to help support your effort. You need to do your research and, like I said before, be prepared to explain the benefits of the project. Where can this project take the community in the next 10 years? How can it bring in additional resources to help support the growth of that community? And again, before you start putting anything in the ground, contact your regulatory agencies because it's really important to know the law. Baltimore has been outstanding in supporting the urban agricultural movement and including feedback and folks from community members as far as the direction that we're trying to proceed. So if you're already an existing farm, these are just a few tips to continue to build on that successful relationship because it's not just the community, but these are also future customers. So when you're looking to set up your farm stand, if I see some Swiss chard, and I had an incident with it, I see Swiss chard, beautiful colors, but I have no idea what to do with it with my family. Why would I buy it? Because I know my kids are not going to eat it. I don't know what to do with it as a mom. So it's important to, you know, educate yourself and be open. Cooking classes, demonstrations, garden tours are a great opportunity to show folks what's going on often right around the corner and they have no idea on some of the benefits that it can bring. Having a vision of partnership can really help make people feel comfortable with some of the projects that are going on. I've often found with hoop houses, vandalism typically occurs either on the weekends or during spring break when kids are out of school. We have nothing to do. I've come in and seen shovels and rakes literally hanging from the plastic in the ceiling because nobody had been included in the process. So it's really important. Communication is equally important. You really can't over communicate. Learning opportunities, support that your project may need, because you'd be surprised that just people walking down the street and children, young people are really interested. They're a little different by the time they're teenagers, but the young folks, when you get them in a little earlier, they're not open to learning some of these life processes, as I say, because it's important to, as I tell them, they're the ones that's going to change the future. So the way that we impact the outside world or share our knowledge with others is crucial. One of the biggest things in any relationship, personal, business, is honesty. You can't go into a community with the misconception of intentionally misleading people on the possibilities, or even starting off with a bunch of promises that you're not even sure if you can fulfill. It's good to, again, engage folks in good conversation and get feedback and be honest about what it is that you're trying to do and where you're trying to take your urban ag project. I kept that really simple, didn't I? That's it for me. Well, no, I figured we'd lead into questions. Yeah. I actually have a flat tire. My car's parked on Maryland Avenue, so.
Anybody have any questions?
For me or anyone? It's nice to meet you.
I have one back here.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
What is the most common reason for starting a garden in Baltimore? Why do people do it? Is it because they want to get their kids involved? Is it a family activity? Are they really into being locavores? I mean, what drives?
I actually think it comes from a person sharing their passion. You might actually just find somebody, because with myself, I met the extension service agent at the time. He was like, you might be interested. I was at a grow earth box.
Oh.
I forgot the name of the program, but I was at a training with him. He was like, you might be interested. It was the best training ever because we actually filled the earth box with soil. We got dirty and planted. And from there, it was
exploration.
Yeah.
But also for me, when I was asked to moderate this, I started because I wanted to eat healthy vegetables. I didn't want to have to drive far, and I wanted to know. I went to the market to buy red peppers, and they said $2.99 a pound.
Right.
So I bought a package and made my own.
Yeah.
But it was more having my own and wanting to know. I didn't want to continue to pay for the gas and the U-Haul, the hauling it across the country. So a lot of folks that I'm involved with that do community gardens, they just want to have their own access to healthy and know where it came from.
Know where it came from and what's on it.
Yeah.
You know, the pesticides is a big piece, but there is still a whole population that doesn't have a clue, and you eat whatever, because you really don't know what's on your food, where it's coming from, and how long it's been in storage, so. Anybody else?
I have a question for Naima. What's been your experience with people's reactions to fences, and have you seen there being more or less vandalism with fences, gardens that appear to be open and not fenced? Are people in the neighborhood more accepting of and taking greater ownership of?
I've seen a little bit of both. There actually was a hoop house over in the Pinnacle area, and the kids would climb the fence. We found pieces of the fence inside the hoops. So it really does vary. I think most fences kind of may make people feel isolated or secluded. So if you're looking to be open to, you might need a fence for the deer depending on where you are. That's one of the community gardens just put up a 10-foot fence, and it was just for the deer. So, but a fence is optional. What I say is that blocks are not for innocent people. So if somebody's going to do something, it's no big deal to climb a fence. So just really you have to figure out how is that what you want to invest in. But I would definitely encourage you to go to a couple community associate meetings and let folks come and be a part of the project.
Also, when we did ours, they said use, I think it was blackberries, some type of
natural barrier.
A natural
That's a
barrier.
good idea.
So if you do a natural barrier and blackberries kind of rough, Just use something that's a deterrent, and you know.
That's a good idea, and you can still harvest the berries.
Right. I mean, like, there's an urban farm in Detroit called Lafayette Greens, and they have a fence, but it's not very imposing. Like, the way that it's been designed, you can still see straight through to the garden, and it still seems open and accessible. But also in terms of the area it's located in the city, it's not within a residential area, so it's more open to vandalism.
Some of her facts were really good, because if you include the people and you make them, you know, and you share in the sweat equity,
Yes.
you know, you have to make it, this is not, because when we did that, they said, oh, you wanna give it to us? No.
No, you have to come
This
to
is
work.
a partnership, we wanna, you know, and showing people how to do things, you know, Swiss chard. And a lot of communities, people don't eat Swiss chard. People don't know what kohlrabi is, so I learned how to grow vegetables, because people don't wanna eat vegetables, it's too much work. So they're less likely to steal stuff that they're gonna have. You can just grab a tomato and season it up. But when you look at an acorn squash or some type of squash, they're like, you know what? That's for that old lady over there. We're not gonna bother that, you know. They don't steal vegetables. But I'd like to thank everyone for your patience and your support, and we kept within an hour, even though we started late. I want to thank you. You did good. And I'd like to thank my panel, everyone, and I need to ask you about the animals, because I have a cat. I don't have a cat, but you know.